March 19, 1945, 6:41 hours. East China Sea, Task Force 58. USS Athena, 3 trained, a Baltimore-class heavy cruiser, barely 3 months in service, moved through cold grey swells as if the ocean itself were holding its breath. Lieutenant Commander Harold Wexler stood in the gunnery director, coffee forgotten in his hand, watching radar scopes bloom with new contacts, too many, too fast. Holy Mother, they're coming in low. Radar Tech 3rd Class, Emilio Vargas muttered. Dozens, no scores. Sir, this is Kikusui scale. He wasn't wrong. Ahead of the coming Okinawa landings, the Japanese had unleashed a chain of early kamikaze saturation attacks, testing the fleet's response times, scattering picket stations, forcing cruisers like Athena into sudden, violent defensive brawls. But on Athena, there was a secret advantage, an accident, an anomaly, and in the eyes of Navy Ordnance officials, an outright failure. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. 3 weeks earlier, Athena's weapons division had quietly received a pallet of experimental fuses mislabeled as standard VT shells. Inside were 512 shells, equipped with what engineers at Naval Ordnance Laboratory had already written off as a defective design. The XR-47 proximity fuse, a variant whose Doppler response curve was too sensitive, triggering early detonations in 60% of tests. The XR-47 wasn't supposed to fly. It wasn't even supposed to be on the ship. And yet, by a logistical hiccup no one could fully explain, the crate had been loaded aboard Athena at Ulithi. The ship's gunnery officer, Lieutenant Commander Wexler, had discovered the paperwork error only after noticing a faint amber band on the fuse cap's markings indicating experimental hardware. When he contacted Fleet Ordnance, destroy them. They are not approved for combat. But Wexler didn't destroy them. Not because he distrusted headquarters. Wexler had served since 39 and respected the system. He didn't destroy them because of one man, Gunner's Mate First Class Thomas Red Kellerman. Kellerman, the kind of man who could jury-rig a coffee pot to run off an auxiliary battery, had inspected the XR-47 units and said something Wexler never forgot. Sir, these ain't failures. These are meaner. Kellerman explained that the XR-47's supposed flaw, its tendency to detonate slightly early, could actually produce a larger forward blast envelope, devastating for head-on kamikazes who closed the distance at 300–400 millas per hora. A risky theory, but a tempting one, and so the controversial shells were quietly stowed in turret-ready racks, reserved for a day Wexler prayed would never come. That day came on March 19, 6:44 hours. Athena's radar speakers vibrated with the staccato tone of multiple converging tracks. Angels, 3-5, descending, accelerating. Bearing 091 to 126 multiply groups. Estimate 24 hasta 40 aircraft. Wexler steadied his voice. Sound general quarters. All hands. Man battle stations. Klaxons wailed. Hatches slammed. Crews sprinted. In the know. Dose handling room. Kellerman and his team loaded the first XR-47 shells, adrenaline sharpening every movement. Above deck, the sea exploded into motion destroyers weaving, carriers turning to the wind, flak bursts already dotting the sky from distant ships. But Athena's assigned picket zone placed her directly in the path of the incoming storm, 6:49 hours. Range 9,800 yards. The first group of 4 Zeros broke through cloud cover, diving straight toward Athena's starboard bow. Mount 51, commence firing. Mount 52, stand by. The first 5-inch salvo roared out 4 rounds streaking skyward, each capped with an XR-47. Inside, the controversial fuse came alive. Micro-vacuum tubes activated. The oscillator, pulsed 182 MHz signals. Amplifiers calculated closing velocity. At 800 yards, as the lead 0 banked slightly, the first XR-40 EC-8 went off not a clean, centered proximity burst, but a forward-biased detonation that birthed a jagged cone of shrapnel expanding at Mach 1.8. The Zero didn't explode. It simply ceased to exist, a burst of flame, a wing spiraling one way, an engine another. "Direct hit," the spotter shouted. "Not direct mid-air disintegration," replied Wexler. The crew hardly had time to marvel. 3 more Zeros streaked toward them. Another salvo. 3 detonations. 3 kills. The deck crew cheered, but brief, breathless, nervous cheers, because the air was now vibrating with the sound of more engines. The Japanese were adapting. Instead of one wave, they came in layers, corkscrewing, diving low, climbing into the sun, dragging Athena's fire. Control across every quadrant. Acero plunged from astern. Athena twisted. Mount 53 fired 2 XR-40 rounds. The first detonated too early, just like the lab tests said it would, but the second burst caught the Zero mid-roll, shredding the cockpit, sending the aircraft tumbling into the wake. 5 down, 6, 7. But the danger was rising, not decreasing. By 3 hours, the second wave arrived. Kint's planes strong, many carrying 250 K-bombs, modified for instantaneous fuse impact pure ship killers. The Japanese noticed something strange, something terrifying. Their comrades weren't being shot down. They were blowing apart several hundred feet away from the cruiser, farther out than expected, farther than any American fuse had detonated before. One Japanese pilot radioed in panic. "The enemy shells burst early, they throw metal far." At 7 hours, Wexler received the first inkling something extraordinary was happening. Fire control reported, "Sir, hit probability is off the charts. We're not missing. They're not getting through." Kellerman, below deck, loading shell after shell, shouted up the voice pipe, "Told ya, these bastards explode just where Kamis don't want him to." The XR-40 ECT's quirk, the tendency to fire slightly early, was perfect for fast-closing targets. A normal fuse triggered at 70 feet. The XR-40 ECT went at 120–150 feet. That distance mattered. Most kamikazes approached Athena head-on, engines screaming, propellers churning at 802 RPM. Their closure rate meant that by the time a normal proximity fuse detonated, the kamikaze still had enough momentum to plow into the ship in flames. But the XR-40 EC-8A denied momentum. It broke kamikazes apart before their final charge could manifest. Wexler realized, "We're fighting with a fuse designed for kamikazes by accident." The next doth minutes were a blur of fire, smoke, and steel. Athena's guns were red-hot. Barrels hissed with steam as sea-water sprayed over them. The sky was turning black with shrapnel clouds. Zero number Dotha disintegrated at 6 yards. Number Tretha lost its wing at 4,900. Number 14 tried a low approach at wave-top height only for an early XR-40. EC-8 burst to shred the tail and drive it into the sea like a thrown spear. Number Kint nearly broke through. It came low, weaving, using smoke from other aircraft as cover. Mount 50 those fired 1 round. Missed. Another. Missed. 3rd round XR-40 EC-8 activated. It detonated so early the crew thought it malfunctioned. But the cloud of fragments intersected the Zero perfectly. The aircraft erupted in a flash of orange and black and splashed in pieces. By 7 hours, Athena had shot down 18 planes, more than some destroyers managed in an entire campaign. But the kamikazes weren't done. Japanese command, confused and furious at the sudden losses, ordered the remaining elements to converge on Athena's vector. They believed she was firing some new anti-aircraft weapon. They were right, though it was a weapon Washington wanted destroyed. The next wave was the largest yet, approximately 20 aircraft. They came in from 3 axes. high sun diving group, low sea skimming group, distractor climbing formation. Any one of these would normally overwhelm a cruiser. Wexler looked at his depleted ammunition readouts. They had just 174 XR-48 shells left. We fire until the magazines are dry. Yes, sir. 726. 727. 728. Rounds fired. 18. Kamikazes downed. 7. Fire controlman said the XR-48 was like cheating. Not perfect, no system was but impossibly effective at mid-range. The third wave tried everything: zigzags, spirals, shallow climbs, hard-angle plunges. But burst after burst of forward-biased fragmentation destroyed aircraft before they reached their terminal dives. At 7:35, Athena downed her 25th attacker, a record for any heavy cruiser in a single engagement. But the magazine was running low, too low. A zero burst through a screen of falling debris, 400 yards out, on perfect vector to hit the navigation bridge. Mount 51 fire. Out of XR-47 shells, sir. We're down to standard fuses. A heartbeat of silence. A death sentence. Standard fuses were too slow, too precise, too dependent on exact calculations. The kamikaze dove. Wexler could see the pilot's headband whipping in open cockpit wind. Kellerman, below decks, made an insane decision. He sprinted to the missorted pallet, marked for destruction the original XR-48 reject crate. Inside were DSSA's fuses that had failed inspection entirely, the worst of the failed batch. Load 'em, Abe barked. They'll blow in the tube, or they'll blow that bastard out of the sky. Mauve. 7:36 hours. The round was rammed into the breech. Firing sequence initiated. The shell left the barrel clean. Everyone held their breath. The zero closed to doze. 600 yards. Doze. 300. Doze. Zien. Then, a burst. A massive, violent, asymmetrical explosion. The fuse detonated nearly 200 feet early. A freak malfunction. But the cone of shrapnel expanded perfectly into the Zero's dive path, an accidental geometry of salvation. The kamikaze sheared apart like wet paper. By 7:49 hours, the final kamikaze fell in flames. A total of 20 those aircraft destroyed by one cruiser, more than any surface ship had achieved in a single engagement throughout the entire Pacific War. But Wexler wasn't celebrating. He was staring at an empty XR-48 crate, because what he'd discovered was simple and dangerous. A supposedly failed fuse was the most effective anti-kamikaze weapon in the U.S. Navy. And now Washington would want to know how it ended up aboard Athena and whether anyone had defied orders. As damage reports came in minimal damage, only superficial, Wexler already knew the next fight wouldn't be against aircraft. It would be against the Navy's own bureaucracy. Against secrecy. Against fear of admitting a mistake. Because the XR-48 wasn't just a weapon. It was a scandal. A miracle born of error. And someone would soon try to bury the truth. March 19, 1945, once 18 hours. USS Athena, 136, East China Sea, 3 hours after the battle. The ocean had finally quieted. Smoke still curled off the barrels of the 5-inch batteries, but the frenetic violence of the morning had dissolved into an eerie stillness. Sailors lined the rails, staring silently at patches of oil and floating debris, the only proof that dozens of aircraft had tried to kill them. Compared to most ships after a kamikaze assault, Athena looked untouched. A few shrapnel pits on the superstructure, a cracked signal light, a dent in the portside railing. That was it. No raging fires, no cratered deck, no mangled gun mounts, no dead. On a day that saw multiple destroyers burning in orange columns visible for 20 miles, Athena was nearly pristine. That alone would raise questions. Lieutenant Commander Harold Wexler sat in the gunnery report room, sleeves rolled up, face drawn with exhaustion. His chair hadn't been comfortable at the best of times. But right now, it felt like a courtroom bench. On the table before him were 3 damage reports, spotter logs, 2 radar track summaries, and the rushed, sweat-stained shell inventory sheets. Most important of all was a yellow folder stamped Ordnance classified XR47 series. He shouldn't even have this file. He certainly shouldn't have used the shells inside it. In the dim fluorescent light, the folder seemed to stare back at him like an accusation. Chief Fire Control Officer Henry Lawson, a tall, thin Missourian, whose voice always carried a hint of preacher's cadence, stepped into the room with a clipboard pressed against his chest. "Sir," Lawson began, "we've confirmed it, counting the early morning, loads and last night's firing drills. We burned through exactly 346 XR40 rounds." Wexler finished, rubbing his temples. "Far more than command ever intended us to have." Lawson glanced at the empty pallet in the corner. "Granted. I don't think anyone up the chain will believe what these fuses just did." Wexler exhaled. "And that's the problem." Down in the handling rooms, Red Kellerman sat on an ammunition crate, grease smeared across his forehead, a cigarette burning low between 2 calloused fingers. Around him the gun crews were sprawled on the deck, too tired to talk, too wired to sleep. Their adrenaline was still crashing. Kellerman exhaled smoke and stared at his hands that had loaded the faulty fuses that saved them. Petty Officer Blaine, still, shaking lightly, finally broke the silence. "You think the old man's gonna bust us for using experimental gear?" Kellerman grunted. "If anything, they better pin a medal on us." "Yeah," Blaine replied, "but we broke about 20 regulations." 22, Kellerman corrected. "Maybe 23. Laughter rippled weakly through the room. It felt good. It felt human. But even as they laughed, Kellerman's expression kept dipping back toward something darker, something he didn't let the younger sailors see, because he knew what the Navy did with accidents. He knew what it did with anomalies, and heroes often became scapegoats when paperwork pointed the wrong way. At those hours, Captain Raymond Mercer arrived in the gunnery report room. He didn't need to. The crew called him Iron Mercer, a man with a calm voice that could cut steel and a gaze that made men stand straighter without realizing it. Wexler stood. "At ease," Mercer said, taking the chair across from him. "We need to talk." Wexler slid over the early draft of the after-action weapons report. Mercer skimmed it. His jaw tightened at several lines. XR40 series used in full operational capacity. Unscheduled deployment due to exigent battlefield conditions. Significant variance from expected detonation curves. "God Almighty," Mercer whispered. "How many?" 32 aircraft shot down, sir. 29 by 5-inch batteries. 25 with XR40 fuses. Mercer set the paper down. "Harold, this is the most effective anti-air defense a cruiser's mounted in the Pacific. Ever." Wexler nodded. "And that," Mercer said, rubbing his eyes, "puts us neck-deep in trouble." A sharp knock. Communications Officer Ensign Tuttle entered, clutching a decoded dispatch. "Priority message from Task Force 58 Command, sir." Mercer read it, and his expression hardened. Details regarding unusual anti-air effectiveness. Report fuse types, lot numbers, storage status, and requisition trails. Admiral Mitcher wants full accountability within 6 hours. Mercer slowly lowered the paper. Wexler felt a cold tension knot in his stomach. "A 6-hour deadline," Mercer said. "They're suspicious." "Sir," Wexler said, "the moment they see XR40 in the report, they'll launch an investigation, and investigations make enemies. Excessive sensitivity to Doppler shifts. Triggering observed at double the safe detonation distance. High risk of premature burst endangering friendly aircraft. Recommend termination of development, Sir Wexler," said. The XR-47 wasn't just abandoned, it was politically killed. Mercer stared at him. 2 development officers were reassigned, and a third resigned outright. Some people bet their reputations on shutting this program down. Mercer leaned back heavily. So if word gets out that these fuses saved our ship and shot down 30 planes, those same men, Wexler finished, will want the story buried. At Catesdy's hours, the fleet's aviation ordnance inspector, Commander Eloise Harland, arrived aboard via whaleboat 58 years old, sharp as a monofilament racer, and famous for tearing apart sloppy ordnance practices. Most officers dreaded her visits. Mercer greeted her on the quarterdeck. "We weren't expecting inspection this soon." "You weren't," she said, stepping aboard with stiff joints. "Your cruiser shot down more aircraft in 40 minutes than most carriers do in a week. That raises questions." "Understandable." She turned sharply toward him. "Let's make one thing clear, Captain. I'm not here to hang anyone. I'm here to understand. It was the closest thing to reassurance the Navy ever offered." Harland followed Wexler below decks into the handling rooms. Kellerman snapped to attention. Harland waved him down. "At ease. I want to see the fuse rack." She inspected the empty XR-47 pallet, the remaining fragments of fuse caps, and the clean stacking pattern of spent casings. Then she knelt down and picked up a fuse fragment, holding it to the light. Her eyes widened. "Well, I'll be damned," she muttered. "Haven't seen one of these in 8 months." Wexler watched her carefully. "You know the XR-47 program well, ma'am?" She smirked bitterly. "I helped build the damn thing before they shut us down." Kellerman blinked. "You, ma'am, with respect. The specs in the manuals," said the XR-47 was a failure. Harland let out a short, dry laugh. "Of course they did. That's what the politicians in uniform wrote. The engineers, us, we knew different." Wexler frowned. "What exactly happened?" Harland stood slowly. The XR-47 wasn't a failure. It was too good. So good it scared people higher up the chain. "Scared them?" Wexler asked. "They were afraid mass deployment would force the Japanese to change kamikaze tactics, that it would expose a critical weakness in our own fuse tech, and most importantly, it would embarrass the officers who had already poured millions into the inferior Mark 53 series." Kellerman spat on the floor. "So they buried it." "They buried it," Harland confirmed. "And you just dragged it back into the war." Harland faced Wexler squarely. "I need honesty, Lieutenant Commander. Did you knowingly deploy these fuses?" Wexler inhaled. He could lie, or he could tell the truth. "Yes," he said firmly. "I made that decision." Harland nodded. "Good. I prefer officers who think rather than ones who hide." Mercer stepped forward. "Commander, are we in trouble?" Harland exhaled, her voice softening. "You're in danger, Captain, but not from the Japanese." Wexler felt his blood chill. She continued. "There are people in Washington who will try to rewrite this entire engagement to protect their reputations. They will undermine reports. They will question your logs. They will say the kills were exaggerated or unverified." Kellerman bristled. "We saw the bastards explode. How can they deny that?" Harland gave him a sad smile. "Because bureaucrats didn't see it. And what they don't see, they can erase." Back in the captain's cabin, Harland laid out their choices. Option uno, submit the full truth, risk a tribunal, loss of command, and the destruction of careers. Option dos, lie outright, claim standard Mark 53 fuses were used. Avoid scrutiny but lose the chance to fix America's flawed AA system. Option tres, submit a partial truth. A, tactical truth, a survivable truth, and one that could quietly reopen the XR-47 program. Wexler looked at Mercer. "Sir, what do we do?" Instead, he stepped to the porthole and stared out at the sea that should have swallowed them whole that morning. Finally, he turned. "We tell the truth," Mercer said, "but we tell it smart." Harland smiled slowly. That's the answer I hoped for. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, like this video, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Harland outlined the strategy. Document all. Rather, track data, proving the range of kills. Submit gunnery camera footage, showing early burst envelopes. Include Kellerman's technical analysis of fuse performance. Categorize the XR-40 ECT deployment as emergency usage of missorted ordnance. Request formal, temporary approval for battlefield evaluation. This approach protected the crew, protected the ship, protected the truth, and forced Washington to acknowledge the weapon without admitting fault. Wexler finally felt the crushing pressure ease. "One question," he said. "What happens if command still tries to bury this?" Harland gave a thin grin. "Oh, they'll try. But once this report hits Mitch's desk, once he sees how many lives, a single crate of so-called failed fuses saved, he'll make damn sure someone listens." She leaned forward. "And, gentlemen, I'll be standing right beside you." As night settled over the East China Sea, Athena cut through the dark waters with her crew exhausted but alive. Down in the ordnance rooms, Kellerman cleaned the last of the fuse fragments and murmured, "Those little bastards saved us." Up on the bridge, Mercer drafted the final version of the report carefully, precisely, truthfully. And in the gunnery office, Wexler stared at the last fragment of an XR-40 ECT fuse. A miracle. Ah, scandal. A weapon born from error. And possibly the only reason Athena wasn't lying on the seafloor. Tomorrow, Washington would see the report, and tomorrow, someone would start a fight. Not a fight with guns or ships, a fight with pens and egos and power, a fight for the truth, a fight for the future of every ship in the Pacific. March 20th, 1945, 4:52 USS Athena, Sea 36, East China Sea, en route to Kirama. Reto anchorage. The sky was still black, the sea a glassy sheet reflecting the faintest hint of dawn. Athena cut across the water at 14 knots, engines humming steadily, nothing like the frantic maneuvers of the day before. But inside the ship, tension coiled like wire pulled too tight. Today the report would be sent. Not just any report, the report. The one that could vindicate them, or destroy them. Captain Mercer sat alone in his cabin, eyes scanning the document projected from the red lens lamp. His fingers drummed the desk slowly, rhythmically. Wexler's technical notes were flawless. Kellerman's fuse analysis, surprisingly eloquent for a man who swore like a Boston dockhand, was both blunt and undeniable. Harland's annotations gave the whole thing weight, legitimacy, credibility. But the numbers were still unbelievable. 32. Enemy aircraft destroyed 25. By XR-40, 7 fuses, 0 hits, sustained 0 casualties. The Navy wasn't used to clean victories. War didn't give those out freely. Someone back home would look at this and say it was exaggerated, fabricated, impossible. Mercer rubbed his temples. God help the man whose miracle embarrasses the wrong people. A knock. Enter. Wexler stepped in, holding a steaming mug. "Thought you could use this, sir." Mercer managed a weary smile. "Is this standard Navy coffee, or Kellerman's creation?" Wexler smirked. "Kellerman's. The kind that could strip hull paint." Mercer accepted it gratefully. Wexler waited quietly while the captain finished reviewing. Finally, Mercer set the papers down. "Sir," Wexler said gently, "you don't have to sign this. Commander Harland said she can." Mercer cut him off with a raised hand. "Harold, this is my ship, my men, my responsibility. If command wants someone to hang for this, I'm the one who stands in the noose." Wexler's jaw tightened. "Then we stand with you." Mercer shook his head. "No, let's not romanticize this. Washington has a habit of turning heroes into scapegoats. If this thing goes sideways, one signature is better than 3. Wexler sank into the spare chair. You think they'll bury it? I think, Mercer said slowly, that they'll try, but the truth is too loud. 32 aircraft loud. He signed, a single stroke of pen that felt like a gunshot. Meanwhile, below decks, the Athena's mess hall hummed with whispered rumors. Untouched speaking in low, urgent voices. You don't know the brass. I heard we're getting presidential unit citation. No Navy crosses for the fire control team. Shut up, you'll jinx it. Kellerman entered, still wiping carbon from his hands. Everyone turned. Blaine called out, Hey, read any truth, we're all headed to court-martial. Kellerman rolled his eyes. No one's getting court-martialed. Then why does the captain look like he's about to fight God himself? Red blew out a long breath. Because sometimes the Navy hates miracles, especially ones that weren't approved. The mess hall fell silent. After a moment, Blaine whispered, Red, did we do something wrong? Kellerman sat down across from him and leaned in. What we did yesterday, that was survival. What we're doing today, that's politics. And politics don't care about survival. At 7:10 hours, Commander Eloise Harland called a meeting with Mercer and Wexler in the chart room. She was already halfway through a cup of coffee so strong it probably could have been classified as fuel. We need to anticipate the response from Mitcher HQ, she said, setting down her mug. What's your prediction? Mercer asked. 3 possibilities. She raised a finger. Uno. They believe everything. Unlikely. Admirals don't blindly accept miracles. Another finger. Dos. They question the data and demand a secondary audit. Very likely. Meaning? Meaning, Harland said. They'll try to frame this as a lucky coincidence or the result of exceptional gunnery discipline rather than new tech. Wexler snorted. Even with 25 exer 47 kills? Especially with 25 exer 47 kills. Harland spread. Several drafts across the table. What matters is this. The report must be unassailable. No contradictions, no gaps, no ambiguities. Wexler scanned the pages. We've covered everything: range data, timing, fire control logs. What else can they question? Harland pointed her pencil at him. They'll question intent. Mercer nodded. Of course. It was the only angle they had. You knowingly deployed experimental ordnance without authorization, Harland said. They'll use that to undermine the whole engagement. We argue necessity. We argue survival. And most importantly, we argue that the ordnance was missorted by supply before it ever reached the ship. But it was, Wexler said. Harland's expression sharpened. Yes. And somewhere out there is the officer who made that mistake. That man makes you innocent. We not accuse. Simply highlight the sequence of events. Let the chain of command fill in the implications. They'll blame the missorter, not the men who used what they were given. Mercer leaned back, impressed. You're very good at this, Commander. Harland shrugged. Once you've spent 20 years fighting idiots, you learn their patterns. At 9:18 hours, Communications Officer Tuttle transmitted the full after-action report in encrypted bursts toward Task Force 58 HQ. Wexler stood beside him, arms crossed, as the crypto machine spat out the final confirmation sequence. Message sent, sir. Wexler exhaled slowly. Now they could only wait. At 1:40 hours, a reply arrived from Mitcher's flagship, USS Bunker Hill. Mercer read it aloud to Wexler and Harland in the captain's cabin. Report received. Preliminary review common said. Admiral Mitcher requests clarification of XR-47 inventory. Please confirm why decommissioned ordnance was present. Aboard. Cry, sir. Further curious pending. Wexler Greemethed. Here we go. Harland nodded. They're digging. Mercer tossed the message onto his desk. Clarification, not accusation. Yet, Harland leaned forward, tapping the table. We stick to the story. The shells were mislabeled. You discovered the mistake late. In the chaos of combat, with ships already taking hits around you, you made the only logical choice. Wexler asked. Will they buy it? No, Harland said bluntly. But they can't disprove it either. 4 hours later, at Kint's Trainty those, another message came. This one was shorter. Per Admiral's directive, Ordnance Board en route to Kirama Reta to the brief your crew. Arrival in Trainty 6 hours. Wexler felt his stomach sink. An Ordnance Board? That's serious. Harland's jaw tightened. That means Admiral Morrison. Wexler didn't know the name. Mercer did. He swore under his breath. Morrison is the bastard who killed the XR-47 project. Wexler froze. Why the hell would he be sent? Because, Harland said darkly, if your report is true, Morrison's political career is finished. Wexler suddenly understood, and he's coming to bury the evidence. The news raced through the ship like electricity. Even the greenest sailors understood what an ordnance board meant. Blaine whispered to Red. Is this bad? Kellerman chewed on his cigarette filter. This is worse than bad. This is the Navy coming to decide what version of yesterday actually happened. And if they don't like what happened, Kellerman looked him dead in the eye, then they'll say it didn't. At 18:57 hours, a final encrypted transmission arrived, this one not from Mitch's flagship, but from an intelligence channel Mercer didn't recognize. Tuttle brought it in with wide eyes. Sir, it wasn't addressed by name, only to Captain of Seacienta Trainty says. Mercer unfolded the paper and frowned. It contained just one line. The story is already circulating on 3 ships. Wexler's breath caught. Someone leaked it. Harland let out a long, low whistle. Well, that changes things. Mercer met her gaze. Explain. Captain, if the story is already circulating among the task force, it's now historic fact. The more sailors who hear it, the harder it becomes to bury. Wexler understood instantly. The more witnesses, the louder the miracle. Harland corrected him. No. The louder the scandal. And scandal forces action. Mercer folded the message slowly, thoughtfully. So Morrison's coming to kill the truth. Wexler finished. But the truth is already loose. That night, the Athena moved steadily toward anchorage, her hull glowing faintly under the moon. Above decks, lookouts scanned for aircraft they couldn't risk another surprise. Below decks, sailors lay awake in their bunks, staring at the overhead in the dark, wondering what tomorrow would bring. Would they be praised, punished, ignored, or rewritten? In the gunnery office, Wexler stood alone, looking at the captured shrapnel patterns from the XR-40, EC-8 bursts photographs taken from the gunnery cameras. These weren't doctored, weren't opinions, weren't theories. They were fact, undeniable, uncomfortable, truth. You're awake. So are you. The captain stepped beside him. Harland believes Morrison will try to minimize the XR-40 ECT's contribution, Mercer said. He'll claim our gunners were simply exceptional. Our men are exceptional. Yes, but not that exceptional. They stood in silence. Eventually, Mercer spoke. When the board arrives tomorrow, things may get ugly. Wexler nodded. We'll stand together, sir. Mercer put a hand on his shoulder. Harold, after everything you've done, you're not just my gunnery officer. You're the reason we're alive. Wexler swallowed tightly. Thank you, sir. Get some sleep. After you do. Mercer chuckled faintly. Fair enough. As Athena approached Kiramaretto at dawn, the crew lined the rails, watching the growing shape of the anchorage, a hive of ships, smoke, cranes, and the distant wrecks of kamikaze victims towed in for repair. Every hull told a story. Most of them tragic. Destroyers limpid in with missing masts, carriers with black scars from deck fires, cruisers with torpedo holes yawning open like wounds. Wexler felt a hollow H in his chest. Yesterday they should have joined those ships, should have been burning, should have been burying men at sea, but they weren't. because of a fuse no one wanted. Mercer stood on the bridge wing, watching as a sleek, grey launch approached, white spray kicking up around its bow. On board were 4 officers. 3 wore standard ordnance insignia. The 4th wore the distinctive cap braid of a senior official. Harland swore under her breath. Damn. He came personally. Wexler followed her gaze. Standing tall, stiff-backed, a storm of authority in human form, Rear Admiral Leonard Morrison, architect of the XR-47's cancellation, now arriving to decide the fate of the men who proved him wrong. Harland muttered, "Boys, brace yourselves. The next battle doesn't involve planes." Wexler's pulse thudded in his ears. Mercer straightened his uniform. The launch drew alongside. Lines were thrown. The ladder clattered. And as Morrison stepped aboard Athena, boots clacking like hammer blows on steel, the entire ship seemed to hold its breath. Caleb didn't sleep that night. He tried, God knows he tried, but every time his eyes began to close, he saw the same thing waiting for him behind his eyelids. The shadow. The one that crawled out of the floor like it had been living underneath his house for years. The one that looked at him like it knew him. By Quattro A. M. He'd given up on. Rest entirely. He sat on the edge of his bed with his hoodie pulled tight around his shoulders, staring at the wall as if expecting it to move. It didn't. But he still felt watched. At sunrise, he walked to school with a heavy backpack and an even heavier chest. The world around him looked exactly the same. Cars rushing past, vendors setting up shop, kids laughing on the sidewalk, but something in him had shifted. He felt it, like a faint vibrating in the air, like a string tied between him and something invisible. When he reached the school gates, he sensed it again right behind him. A soft distortion in the air, a cold breath that didn't belong to any human. Caleb spun around. Nothing. But his power whispered against the edges of his mind, like an alarm only he could hear. "Hey bro, you look like crap." Jacob fell in step beside him, hair messy, backpack half open as usual. Caleb forced a smile. "Tired." "You mean terrified," Jacob corrected while opening his energy drink. "Yeah." "Dude, what's going on with you? You've been weird ever since yesterday." He almost said it. He almost confessed everything, the voice, the books moving, the shadow rising from the ground. But how do you say that out loud without sounding insane? "Just nightmares," Caleb muttered. Jacob studied him, then shrugged. "Well, whatever's haunting you, tell it I'm not scared." "I'll fight it." Caleb huffed a laugh. If only fists could solve this. Second period came. Mr. Ramos's math class. Numbers blurred on Caleb's page. His mind was somewhere else, back in that room, in that moment when the world broke open. He felt the hum again. Soft at first, then stronger. His pencil rolled off the desk by itself. Caleb flinched. Jacob, beside him, didn't notice he was too busy drawing tanks in his notebook. Caleb swallowed hard. Breathe. Stay calm. Don't react. But the hum inside him built and built like pressure behind a dam. A cold gust of air brushed across the classroom. Some students shivered, confused. Then, bang. The windows rattled sharply. Several kids jumped. Someone dropped a calculator. Mr. Ramos froze mid-sentence. "What in the—" Caleb sat perfectly still, hands clenched under the desk, heart beating like it wanted out of his chest. He didn't mean for that to happen. He didn't know how it happened. But deep down, he already understood. His power wasn't sleeping anymore. It was waking up fast. During lunch, Caleb went to the restroom, hoping to splash water on his face and regain some sense of normal. He looked into the mirror. At first, he saw only his tired eyes. Then the lights flickered. Once. Twice. And behind him, a faint outline. A tall, crooked silhouette standing in the far corner of the bathroom. Caleb spun around. The corner was empty. His pulse hammered against his ribs. Slowly, he faced the mirror again. The silhouette was still there. But now, it was closer. Its head, tilted, as if studying him, as if waiting. Caleb stumbled back, breath sharp, vision blurring. No, no, no. The light steadied. The mirror cleared. The silhouette vanished. But the cold stayed, and for the first time since his powers awakened, Caleb whispered the question he'd been avoiding. What if it didn't come from inside me, but from something that followed me home? Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.